The Black Hawk was at 6,500 feet when Staff Sergeant Derek Vaughn cut her harness. Maya Torres felt the blade slice through nylon before her brain could process what it meant. 1 second, she was strapped to the helicopter floor, watching Lake Habanaya spread below like a shard of broken mirror. 30 kilometers of water that had once been a resort for Saddam's elite, now just another landmark in a war zone. The next, hands she'd trusted for 9 months, hands she'd stitched back together, hands she'd saved from infection and death, grabbed her tactical vest and shoved her toward the open door. No parachute, no rope, no warning. Just Vaughn's face in the red glow of the cabin lights, empty of everything except cold calculation. The same man who'd told her, "Your family, Doc," after she'd kept him from bleeding out in Fallujah. The same man who'd promised to have her back no matter what. The same man who'd executed 11 unarmed civilians in a Haditha apartment 4 days ago while her helmet cam recorded every single shot. Maya had exactly 3.7 seconds of free fall to understand that the video encrypted on her phone, the footage showing Vaughn putting bullets into women and children, had just become her death sentence. 3.7 seconds to realize betrayal doesn't wear an enemy uniform. It wears the face of the people you'd die for. 3.7 seconds to decide if she was going to scream into the Iraqi night like a victim or use every second of falling to solve the physics problem of how a 140-pound combat medic survives hitting water at terminal velocity. Lake Habanaya rushed up at 120 miles per hour. From this height it looked deceptively peaceful, moonlight turning the surface to hammered silver. Maya knew better. She'd flown over it dozens of times. The lake was shallow in most places, barely 20 feet deep, filled with silt from seasonal floods, the kind of shallow that would shatter bones on impact. But there were deeper sections, ancient springs that fed the lake from below, creating pockets 40 or 50 feet deep. And there was the wreckage. The Iraqi Army helicopter that had crashed 2 months ago during training, its tail section jutting from the water like a broken tombstone. That wreckage might be the only thing that could save her. Above her, 4 more soldiers watched from the Black Hawk's door. Corporal Hayes, whose hand she'd saved after an IED, Specialist Morrison, whose collapsed lung she'd reinflated on a convoy route. Sergeant Chen, whose infected wound she'd cleaned for 2 weeks straight. Private Briggs, whose panic attack she'd talked him through at 0300 when the nightmares got too bad. All of them complicit. All of them watching her fall. All of them thinking the same thing Vaughn was thinking. Problem solved. They were about to learn something every combat medic knows, but never says out loud. When you've spent 9 months keeping other people alive in a war zone, you learn things. You learn anatomy and physics in the exact limits of what a human body can survive. You learn that death is just another medical problem with a solution, if you're smart enough, fast enough, and stubborn enough to find it before time runs out. Maya Torres had 3 seconds left. She went to work. But let's go back. 4 days earlier. Monday, 0330 hours, Haditha, Anbar Province. The apartment building looked like every other structure in Haditha. Concrete scarred by bullets and mortars, windows blown out by explosions, the kind of anonymous architecture that war reduces to background noise. Maya crouched behind a blast wall, medical kit ready, while her squad prepared to breach. At 29, Maya had been in Iraq for 9 months, long enough to know the rhythm of night raids, long enough to recognize when something felt wrong. This raid felt wrong. The mission had been wrong from the start. Bad intel, wrong building, no high-value target, just a dry hole, the 3rd one this month. Staff Sergeant Derek Vaughn's career was hanging by a thread because of those failures. Command was questioning his effectiveness. One more dry hole and he'd be riding a desk stateside, his combat leadership days over. Maya had heard the arguments, seen the stress in his face during briefings. She understood the pressure. What she didn't understand yet was how far that pressure would push him. "Doc, stay tight," Vaughn said through the radio, his voice carrying that edge it always got before violence. Standard, clear, and sweep. Maya adjusted her helmet cam, standard issue for combat medics to document treatment and injuries. The camera recorded everything at eye level, saving footage to an encrypted chip in the camera housing. Normally, she'd review it later for medical training purposes, learning from what went right and what went wrong in trauma situations. Tonight, it would capture something very different. The squad breached the door with practiced efficiency. Maya followed protocol, staying back while the shooters moved through. Her job wasn't to lead assaults, it was to patch up the people who did. The apartment was small, 4 rooms. In the main space, a family huddled together in terror. Maya counted them automatically, medic training cataloging potential casualties. 5 women, 2 young, 3 middle-aged, 1 elderly with a headscarf and frightened eyes. 4 children, the youngest maybe 3 years old, clinging to her mother, the oldest no more than 10 with a backpack still on from school. 2 old men with gray beards and prayer caps holding each other's hands. 11 people, unarmed, terrified, about to die. "Clear left," Hayes called out, his voice tight. "Clear right," Chen confirmed, but Maya heard the uncertainty in it. Vaughn stood in the center of the room, his rifle trained on the family. Maya saw his finger move to the trigger, and her stomach dropped. "Sergeant, they're unarmed," she said quietly, hoping her helmet cam wasn't picking up the tremor in her voice. "No military-age males. No weapons. This is the wrong location." "I can see that, Doc." Vaughn's voice was flat, empty, the voice of a man who'd made a decision and shut down everything human inside him to follow through. His radio crackled. "Viper 6, abort mission. Intel was bad. Wrong location. Extract and return to base." Vaughn's hand moved to his radio. For a moment, Maya thought he'd comply. Report the dry hole. Accept another failure. Take whatever consequences came. Instead, he turned off the radio. "They're insurgent sympathizers," he said to the squad. "Intel confirmed it before we rolled out." There had been no such intel. Maya had been in the briefing. This was supposed to be a structure clear, nothing more. But she saw what was happening, saw Vaughn manufacturing a success where there was only failure, saw him deciding that 11 bodies could be written up as enemy combatants if the report was worded correctly. Military-age males would become armed insurgents. Women would become facilitators. Children would become unavoidable collateral damage during engagement with hostile forces. All he had to do was make the bodies match the story. What happened next took 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Maya knew because later she would watch the footage frame by frame, trying to understand how men she'd served with could transform into something unrecognizable. Vaughn shot the oldest man first, center mass. The crack of the rifle in the enclosed space was deafening. The family started screaming. "Vaughn, what the fuck?" Hayes started to say, his rifle lowering in shock. "Shut up and follow orders," Vaughn snapped. He turned his rifle on one of the women. "They saw us. They'll report our position. We eliminate the threat." Morrison hesitated. Maya saw it, saw him freeze, his weapon halfway raised, his face going pale. "Sarge, these are civilians. They're insurgent collaborators. Fire your weapon, specialist. That's an order." Morrison's hands shook, but he raised his rifle. The massacre lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Vaughn kept shooting, and after that frozen moment of horror, the others joined in. Hayes, Morrison, Chen, Briggs, 5 rifles, 11 unarmed civilians, 4 minutes of execution that Maya's helmet cam recorded with perfect damning clarity. She stood in the doorway, unable to move, unable to look away, unable to do anything except bear witness as the people she'd called brothers for 9 months murdered a family whose only crime was being in the wrong apartment when desperate men needed a success story. When the shooting stopped, the silence was worse than the gunfire. The children weren't moving, neither were their mothers, neither were the old men who'd died holding hands. Vaughn turned and saw her standing there, saw her helmet cam. His eyes went cold and sharp. "Doc," he said calmly, lowering his rifle, "you didn't see anything here." "Understood?" Maya's mouth was dry. Her hands were shaking, but she nodded. "Understood. Good." Vaughn keyed his radio, the same radio he'd turned off 5 minutes ago. "Command, this is Viper 6. Structure clear. Multiple hostile combatants neutralized. 11 enemy killed in action. No friendly casualties. Returning to base." The lie came so easily, it terrified her more than the killing. They staged the scene, placed weapons from their own excess supply near the bodies, made it look like a firefight, professional, practiced. And in that practiced efficiency, Maya understood something horrifying. They'd done this before. On the helicopter ride back to base, nobody spoke. Maya sat with her helmet cam still recording, capturing their faces in the red cabin lights. Morrison stared at his hands. Hayes kept his eyes closed. Chen's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. Only Vaughn looked calm. He caught her eye once and held her gaze. A warning, a threat, an assessment of whether she'd become a problem. She nodded again, played along, played the role of the compliant witness who'd stay silent out of fear. But her helmet cam had recorded everything, and the moment she was alone, that footage would go somewhere Vaughn couldn't reach. Tuesday, 0800 hours. Fob Mackenzie. The supply room was cramped and dark, lit by a single bare bulb. Vaughn had called her there an hour after they'd returned from Haditha. Private, no witnesses. Maya knew what was coming. "Doc, we need to talk about what you saw." "I didn't see anything, Sergeant." Maya kept her voice steady even as her heart hammered. "That's right. You didn't." He stepped closer, blocking the door. "Because if you did see something, if you had footage of something, that would be a problem. For everyone." "I understand." "Do you?" Vaughn's hand rested on his sidearm, not threatening, just there, a reminder. "Because here's what would happen. You'd try to report it, you'd show your little video, but it's 5 decorated soldiers against 1 medic with a history of," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "stress-related performance issues." "I've never had performance issues. You would if we said you did. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison time for filing false reports against superior officers during combat operations, betraying your unit." His voice dropped lower. "Your word against ours. How do you think that plays out?" Maya said nothing. Let him think she was scared. Let him think she was controllable. "There's an easier way, Doc. An accident. Combat is dangerous. People die. Equipment fails. Helicopters crash." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "Or you can be smart. Delete whatever you think you recorded. Forget what you think you saw. And we all go home when our deployment ends. You can keep saving lives. Isn't that what you want?" "I'll be smart, Sergeant." "Good." Vaughn patted her shoulder like a friend, like family. "I knew you would be. You're one of us, after all. We protect each other, right?" "Right. So you'll delete the footage, from the helmet cam, from any backups, everything?" "Yes, Sergeant." He watched her face for a long moment, searching for deception. Maya had learned to lie to insurgents during interrogations, had learned to keep her face blank when treating enemy fighters. She used those skills now. Finally, Vaughn nodded. "Good talk, Doc. Glad we understand each other." After he left, Maya sat in the dark supply room for 10 minutes, waiting for her hands to stop shaking. Then she went back to her bunk and got to work. Tuesday, 0200 hours, Maya's bunk. Everyone else was asleep when Maya removed the encrypted chip from her helmet cam. She worked by the light of her phone, hands steady now that she had a mission. The chip was no bigger than a fingernail, easy to hide, impossible to replace if destroyed. She uploaded the footage to her phone first, using the cable she kept in her personal kit. 4 minutes, 17 seconds of damning evidence. The file size was large, high-definition video with audio. It took 6 minutes to transfer. While it uploaded, Maya created 3 additional safety nets. First, cloud storage, a military-grade encrypted server that she'd set up when she first deployed, meant for storing medical training videos. She uploaded the Haditha footage there, buried in a folder labeled Trauma Care, Sucking Chest Wound Procedures. Nobody would look there. And even if they did, it was encrypted with a 256-bit key only she possessed. Second, her sister. Maya wrote an email with the video attached and very specific instructions. "Carla, I need you to do something for me and not ask questions. I've set up a dead man switch. Every 24 hours at 0600 Eastern Standard Time, I'll send you a text with a specific code. Morning coffee ready. Just a normal sister check-in. If you don't receive that text, wait 6 hours. If you still haven't heard from me by noon, open this email attachment and send it to these addresses. List of CID contacts, Inspector General, 3 major news outlets, and 2 human rights organizations. The video is evidence of a war crime, 11 civilians executed in Haditha, Iraq. If something happens to me, this needs to see the light of day. Don't watch it unless you have to. It's bad. Love you. Stay safe. Maya." She scheduled the email to send in 3 hours, time to arrive during Carla's morning routine in California. Then, she set a daily alarm on her phone. 0600 hours, send the code text. Miss one check-in, and the machine started moving. Third, physical backup. She removed the chip from her helmet cam and replaced it with a blank one from her spare equipment. The original chip went into a small waterproof case, military-grade Pelican micro case, rated to survive explosions and submersion to 100 feet. She wrapped the case in medical gauze for extra padding and sealed it inside her personal medical kit, the kind that never left her person in the field. If Vaughn checked her helmet cam, he'd see the hardware was intact. He'd assume she'd deleted the footage like he'd ordered. He'd assume wrong. By 0300 hours, the footage existed in 4 places: her phone, cloud storage, her sister's email server, and the physical chip. Destroying one wouldn't stop the truth. Destroying all 4 would require killing Maya, hacking military servers, intercepting international email, and finding a chip the size of her fingernail. Vaughn was good, but he wasn't that good. Maya sent the first check-in text. Morning coffee ready. In California, her sister, still asleep, wouldn't see it for another 4 hours. But the system was active, the clock was running, and every 24 hours it didn't reset. Maya was 6 hours closer to Vaughn's destruction. She lay back in her bunk and set her alarm. 0600 tomorrow, another text, another 24 hours of safety. Unless Vaughn figured out the dead man's switch, then she'd have less than 6 hours to live. Wednesday, Thursday. Wednesday passed in tense normalcy. Patrols, medical calls, routine. Maya sent her morning text at 600. Morning coffee ready, Carla replied an hour later. Back at you. Stay safe, sis. Vaughn watched her during mission briefs, not obviously, just enough to let her know he was tracking her movements, her communications, her behavior. Maya played her role, compliant, quiet, the good soldier who followed orders and kept her mouth shut. Thursday morning, she sent another text. Morning coffee ready. That evening, Vaughn called her to the operations tent. Doc, got a training exercise tomorrow morning. Need you in the bird for simulated casualty evacuation drill. 0400 hours, Black Hawk, just routine. Maya's blood went cold, but her face stayed neutral. Copy that, Sergeant. I'll be ready. She knew it was a trap, knew it the moment he said it, but refusing would confirm his suspicions, would tell him she didn't trust him, would accelerate whatever he was planning. So she'd go. She'd climb into that helicopter. She'd strap in next to men who'd become murderers, and she'd be ready for whatever came next. That night, she double-checked her preparations. Phone in its Pelican case, wrapped in medical gauze, sealed in her personal kit. Video chip in the same kit, both waterproof, both shock-resistant, both designed to survive what she might not. She sent one more text to Carla. Morning coffee ready, love you, sis. Whatever happens, you're the best sister anyone could ask for. Carla replied immediately. Everything okay? You sound weird. Just missing home. Talk soon. At 0300 hours, Maya lay in her bunk, unable to sleep, running through possibilities. Vaughn wouldn't kill her on base. Too many witnesses, too much scrutiny. But in the air? During a training exercise? Equipment could fail. Accidents happened. People fell from helicopters all the time in war zones. She'd have to be ready, ready to survive what nobody survives, ready to turn his murder attempt into his confession. At 0330, she got up and geared up. Tactical vest, medical kit secured, phone in its protective case, weapon checked. Not that a pistol would help at 6,500 feet. At 0345, she walked to the flight line where the Black Hawk waited, rotors already spinning. Vaughn stood by the door, his face unreadable in the pre-dawn darkness. Morning, Doc. Hop in. Simple drill. Should be quick. Maya climbed aboard, strapped into the jump seat, watched as Hayes, Morrison, Chen, and Briggs filed in after her, the same 5 men who'd stood in that Haditha apartment, the same 5 men who'd murdered 11 people and made her watch. Now they were 6,500 feet up, and Vaughn had just cut her harness. Now she was falling. Now she had 3 seconds to survive the unsurvivable. The fall Maya's brain worked with the crystalline clarity that comes from accepting death while refusing to surrender to it. She'd studied aerial photography of this area. Lake Habbaniyah was shallow, 15 to 20 feet in most places, enough to break every bone in her body. But there were deeper sections where ancient springs fed the lake, places where the bottom dropped to 40 or 50 feet. More importantly, there was the wreckage. 2 months ago, an Iraqi Army Mi-17 had crashed during a training exercise. The helicopter had gone down on the lake's eastern shore, partially submerged. The tail section jutted from the water like a broken finger, surrounded by debris field that had excavated the lakebed on impact. That excavation had created a deeper pocket, maybe 30 or 40 feet, right next to the wreckage. Maya had flown over that crash site a dozen times, had used it as a landmark, had even joked with JT about how the Iraqis needed better maintenance. Now that wreckage might save her life. It was directly below her, maybe 300 yards to her right. She shifted her body position, no longer falling straight but angling, using her arms and legs as airfoils to push herself laterally through the air. Every second of drift covered roughly 120 feet horizontally while she fell 200 feet vertically. She needed to cover 300 feet lateral while she had about 600 feet of altitude remaining. The physics were marginal, the angle was terrible. But marginal physics beats certain death. 2.8 seconds remaining. She pulled her arms tight, streamlined her body, dove rather than fell. The wreckage grew larger below her. She could see the twisted metal, the exposed framework, the water churning where the lakebed had been disturbed. 1.9 seconds. She positioned her body for impact, not feet. First like a pencil, but angled like a knife at about 30 degrees, arms crossed over her chest protecting vital organs, legs bent slightly to absorb shock, core muscles tensed but not rigid, rigid muscles shatter, flexible muscles survive. She aimed for the deepest section of water next to the wreck, where the impact crater had gouged out the lakebed and the springs kept the hole from filling with silt. 1.0 seconds. She took the deepest breath of her life, filling her lungs to capacity. The air would provide buoyancy after impact, would help bring her back to the surface if she survived the next second. 0.3 seconds. The water filled her vision. She could see individual ripples, the way moonlight fractured on the surface. Could see the debris field beneath the water, the twisted metal that was about to become her crash pad or her grave. Impact. The world exploded into violence and pain that transcended description. Even at the optimal angle, even with the water at its deepest, hitting liquid at 120 miles per hour was like being crushed by an invisible giant. The shock wave traveled up through her legs first, every joint compressed, ligaments stretched to tearing, bones subjected to forces they were never designed to endure. Her left shoulder took a direct hit against submerged wreckage, a piece of the helicopter's frame that she'd aimed for deliberately, using it to bleed off velocity. The joint dislocated with a wet pop that she felt more than heard. Agony exploded through her arm, but it had done its job. The impact with metal had slowed her just enough that she didn't hit the lakebed at terminal velocity. Her ribs compressed as water tried to force its way through her chest wall. She felt 3 of them crack on the left side. Clean breaks that would hurt like hell, but wouldn't puncture her lungs if she was careful. The compressed air in her lungs probably saved her life, providing an internal cushion against the pressure wave. Her right knee twisted as her body tumbled through the water. She felt the ACL tear, felt her meniscus shred, felt the joint come apart in a way that meant surgery and months of rehab, if she lived long enough to need surgery. But she was still conscious, still thinking, still moving. The cold hit her like a second impact. Spring-fed water from the mountains, barely above freezing. Her muscles seized. Her lungs tried to gasp even though she was underwater. Her vision went gray at the edges as hypothermia began its work immediately. She forced herself to move, forced her good leg to kick, forced her one functional arm to paddle toward what she hoped was the surface. The water was black and cold and pulling her down with the weight of her gear. Her tactical vest, waterlogged and heavy, had become an anchor trying to drag her back to the bottom. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, sucking in air that tasted like oil and metal and victory. Every breath was agony, those broken ribs making their presence known. But she was breathing. She was alive. She'd survived what should have killed her. The current was carrying her away from the impact point, away from the wreckage, toward the shallows. She let it take her, using her good arm to paddle weakly toward the shore. Behind her she could hear the Blackhawk's rotors changing pitch. They were circling back, looking for her body. They'd expect to find her at the impact point. Instead, the current had carried her almost a quarter-mile downstream, around a bend in the shoreline that put her out of sight. Maya dragged herself onto a muddy bank, into the shadow of reeds tall enough to hide a body. For 30 seconds, she just lay there, coughing up lake water and blood, her body screaming with injuries that would have sent any sane person into shock. But shock was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. Above her, the Black Hawk circled the wreckage area, a spotlight stabbed down, sweeping across the water methodically. They were searching. Professional. Thorough. Making sure their problem was solved. Maya forced herself to move, crawling deeper into the reed bed. Every motion sent lightning through her shoulder, her ribs, her knee. But she pushed through it, using her good arm to pull herself into better concealment. She reached into her tactical vest with trembling fingers. Her medical kit was there, foam-padded and sealed. She opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in waterproof layers, her phone lit up when she pressed the button. The screen showed 73% battery. No cell signal this far from base, but the video was still there. The chip was still secure. And most importantly, the dead man's switch was still active. She'd sent her morning text 5 hours ago. If she missed tomorrow's check-in, the video would go public 6 hours later. But first, she had to survive the night. Maya looked at her left arm, hanging useless. The shoulder was dislocated. She could see the unnatural angle, feel the joint out of socket. This was going to hurt. She braced her elbow against a solid tree root, gripped her own wrist with her right hand and pulled while twisting. The sound her shoulder made going back into socket was wet and horrible, like tearing fabric underwater. Black spots exploded across her vision, and she had to bite down on her sleeve to keep from screaming. When her vision cleared, her arm worked again. Weak, painful, but functional. Next, her ribs. She couldn't fix broken bones, but she could stabilize them. She used her rifle sling and medical tape to create a compression wrap around her chest. It wouldn't heal the fractures, but it would keep the broken pieces from shifting, from puncturing a lung if she had to move fast. The knee was worse. Torn ACL and meniscus, maybe bone damage too. She couldn't walk on it properly, but she could walk on it if she had to, if she taped it rigid and ignored the pain. She used the rest of her medical tape and an improvised splint from a reed stalk. It would hold. For a while. In the distance, she heard the Black Hawk land. Half a mile away, on the shore near the wreckage. Vaughn and his team checking the water line, looking for a body. They wouldn't find one. Not where they expected. Maya checked her phone again. Still no signal. She'd have to move to higher ground to get connectivity, to send her check-in text, to call for help. But moving meant exposure, meant they might see her. So she'd wait. Wait for them to give up the search, wait for dawn, wait for an opportunity. She was good at waiting. Combat medics learned patience, learned to stay calm while people died, learned to work through pain and fear and exhaustion. She'd survived the impossible fall. Now, she just had to survive the night. And then she'd make Vaughn regret ever thinking she was a problem that could be solved by throwing her from a helicopter. Dawn. The hunt begins. The sun came up cold and gray over Lake Hypothermia. Maya had moved twice during the night, dragging herself through reeds and mud, leaving a trail that was probably visible from the air but couldn't be helped. She'd found an abandoned irrigation pump house, crumbling concrete half buried in sand, but it had a roof and a wall and a view of the access road. Through her binoculars, cracked from the fall but functional, she watched the Black Hawk return at first light. It circled the impact area one more time, the final confirmation sweep. Vaughn would be filing his report right now. Tragic training accident. Medic fell from helicopter during emergency drill. Harness failed. Body lost in the lake. Recovery efforts ongoing, but chances of survival zero. Full military honors. Notification of next of kin. Her sister would get that notification. Would be told her sister was dead. Would almost send the video immediately. But the dead man's switch had a 6-hour buffer. Maya had 23 hours until her next check-in was due. If she could get to higher ground, get a cell signal, send the text, she'd buy herself another 24 hours. And in that time, help could arrive. She checked her phone. 61% battery. Enough. She just needed signal. The Black Hawk turned northwest, heading back to FOB Mackenzie. Mission accomplished. Problem solved. But as Maya prepared to move, she heard engines, military vehicles on the access road, heading toward the lake. 3 Humvees, moving fast, kicking up dust trails visible from miles away. She focused her binoculars, American vehicles, her unit's markings, and in the lead vehicle, she could see Vaughn's silhouette through the windshield. They weren't waiting 23 hours. They were coming back now, coming to make sure she was really dead, coming to search more thoroughly, or, and this thought made her blood run cold, coming because they suspected she might still be alive. Maya's hand went to her phone. Still no signal. The pump house was in a dead zone, low ground surrounded by hills that blocked transmission. She'd have to move to higher ground to connect. But higher ground meant exposure, meant they might see her. The Humvees stopped half a mile from her position. 6 soldiers dismounted: Vaughn, Hayes, Morrison, Chen, Briggs. And one more. Maya's heart sank. Corporal James Mitchell. JT, her spotter, her friend. The one person she'd thought might still be on her side. All of them. Every single person she'd trusted. They spread out in a search pattern, moving systematically through the reed beds and abandoned structures along the shore. Professional, methodical, hunters looking for prey they suspected might still be breathing. Maya evaluated her options with the cold logic of triage. She couldn't outrun them with her knee, couldn't fight them 6-on-1 with broken ribs and one barely functional arm. Couldn't hide here. They'd clear this building within the hour. But she could use the one advantage she had. She knew they were coming, and they didn't know where she was. She moved out the back of the pump house, using the structure for cover, staying low. Every step sent lightning through her knee, but pain was just her body's opinion, and opinions could be ignored when survival was at stake. She moved perpendicular to their search pattern, using irrigation ditches for concealment, heading toward a low hill to the west. If she could reach the hilltop, she might get signal, might send her check-in text, might call for help before they found her. Behind her, she heard voices, heard Vaughn. Spread out. Check every structure. She couldn't have gone far if she survived. If. So they weren't certain. They suspected, but didn't know. Good. Uncertainty would make them cautious. Maya pushed harder, ignoring the protests from her body. 200 yards to the hill, then a climb, then maybe, signal and safety. She heard a shout behind her. They'd found her tracks in the mud. She went west. Morrison, Chen, flank left. Hayes, Briggs, flank right. I'll take center. Keep radio discipline. The hunt was on. Maya reached the base of the hill and started climbing, using her good hand and knee, pulling herself up rocky slope. Every yard gained was agony. Every yard gained was survival. At the halfway point, she checked her phone. 1 bar. Weak, flickering, but there. She opened her messaging app, typed with one thumb, "Morning coffee ready." The message struggled to send. Progress bar crawling, 10%, 20%. Below her, she saw movement. Morrison climbing the same hill from a different angle, rifle up, scanning for targets. 30%, 40%. Morrison was 200 yards away now. If he looked up the slope, he'd see her. 50%, 60%. Maya's finger moved to her sidearm. She didn't want to shoot Morrison, didn't want to kill someone she'd served with, someone whose life she'd saved. But if he saw her, she'd have no choice. 70%, 80%. Morrison stopped, looked directly at her position, raised his rifle, looked through his scope. Maya drew her pistol, steadied it on a rock with her trembling hand. 90%. Morrison's face was visible through her sights. She could see his expression, could see the moment he recognized her, could see him make a choice. He lowered his rifle, keyed his radio. Negative contact, moving to next grid. 95%, 99%, 100%, message sent. Morrison turned and walked away, deliberately giving her time. Why? Maya didn't understand. But there was no time to figure it out. The message was sent. The dead man's switch was reset. She had another 24 hours. Her phone buzzed, multiple messages coming through now that she had signal. From Carla. Maya, thank God. They said you were dead. The video email opened automatically. I was about to send it. What's happening? From an unknown number. This is Corporal Mitchell. If you're reading this, you're alive. Thank fucking God. Stay hidden. I'm calling in QRF. Don't trust anyone except the QRF commander, Colonel Martinez. He's clean. ETA 30 minutes. Hold position. JT. He'd been on her side after all, had never been part of Vaughn's plan. Maya typed back, alive, injured, grid NK4472, have video evidence, 11 civilians executed, Vaughn and 4 others. Tell Martinez I have proof. If I don't make it, videos with my sister and in cloud storage. They can't cover this up. Send. Then, JT, Morrison just let me go. Is he? Before she could finish, her phone buzzed again. JT, Morrison wasn't at Haditha. Vaughn added him to squad after. Doesn't know about the killings. Just knows they're hunting you. Not sure what he thinks is happening, but he's not part of it. Hold position. 28 minutes. 28 minutes. Maya just had to survive 28 minutes. She moved off the hilltop, working her way into a cluster of boulders that offered concealment and good sight lines. She positioned herself where she could see 3 approaches, her pistol ready, her phone showing 47% battery. The adrenaline that had kept her going was fading. The epinephrine she'd injected an hour ago, combat medics carried it for severe allergic reactions, but it worked just as well for staving off shock, was wearing off. Her vision kept graying at the edges, her hands were shaking. The cold water had stolen too much body heat, and her wet clothes weren't helping. She was going into hypothermic shock. She had maybe 10 minutes of alertness left before her body shut down. Below, she heard Vaughn's voice, closer now. She's injured. Hypothermic. She can't have gone far. Find her. Movement to her left. Chen working through the rocks methodically. To her right, Briggs doing the same. They were boxing her in, narrowing the search area with professional efficiency. Maya checked her phone. 23 minutes until QRF. She might not have 23 minutes. Then she heard it. The sound that changed everything. Helicopter rotors, multiple birds, coming fast from the northeast. The QRF wasn't taking their time. They were already here. Vaughn's voice on the radio suddenly frantic. All units, fall back to vehicles. Training exercise complete. Return to base now. But it was too late. 2 Blackhawks appeared over the eastern ridge, flying low and fast, their approach vectors aggressive. Behind them, an Apache gunship, 30mm cannon tracking Vaughn's team like a predator marking prey. These weren't training helicopters. These were combat birds on a combat mission. Maya stood up from the boulders, waving with her good arm, her broken body barely holding together, but her will unshaken. The lead Blackhawk banked hard toward her position. Through the open door, she saw JT, headset on, pointing down at her, shouting coordinates to the pilot. The helicopter flared into a hover 20 yards away, rotor wash kicking up dust and stones. JT jumped out before the skids touched ground, medic kit in hand, running toward her. Maya, Jesus Christ! He caught her as her legs finally gave out, his arms supporting her weight. What did they do to you? Everything, she managed, her voice cracking, but I got it all. Video, every second. They can't cover this up. The second Blackhawk was landing near Vaughn's position. Soldiers were already dismounting, weapons drawn. A tall officer with colonel's insignia, Martinez, was walking toward Vaughn with handcuffs visible on his belt. Doc, stay with me, JT said, pulling out his medical kit. You're hypothermic, shock setting in. We need to get you warm, get fluids. The video, Maya interrupted, her words slurring now that safety had arrived and her body was finally allowed to shut down. It's uploaded. Cloud storage. My sister has it. They can't. We know, JT said, wrapping her in an emergency blanket. Martinez got your message. Already pulled the cloud files. Already initiated a formal investigation. Vaughn's done. They're all done. Through her graying vision, Maya watched as Vaughn and his team were placed in restraints. Watched Hayes drop to his knees. Watched Chen put his face in his hands. Watched Briggs just stand there, unresisting, like he'd known this moment would come eventually. Only Vaughn fought, tried to draw his sidearm, was tackled by 3 MPs before he could clear the holster. Maya felt herself fading, hypothermia and shock and 9 months of holding everything together finally catching up with her. But she forced herself to stay conscious for one more moment. JT, she whispered. Morrison. He let me go. I know. He came to me this morning. Said something felt wrong about the training exercise. Said you wouldn't have fallen accidentally. He helped me figure out what was happening. JT's voice was tight with emotion. He's not part of this. He's clean. 11 civilians, Maya said, needing him to understand the scope of what had happened. 5 women, 4 children, 2 old men, Haditha. It's all on the video. I saw it, JT said quietly. Martinez made me watch it. Maya, it's the worst thing I've ever seen. But you recorded it. You kept the evidence. You survived Vaughn trying to kill you. You brought them to justice. They threw me from 6,500 feet, Maya said, her words fading now. Thought I'd die. Thought they'd win. You fell 6,500 feet and lived, JT corrected. You survived the impossible. You're the toughest person I know. Not tough, Maya whispered, her eyes closing. Just too stubborn to die and too angry to let them win. The last thing she heard before losing consciousness was JT's voice on the radio. Medevac en route. Patient is critical but stable. She's going to make it. Somehow, despite everything, she's going to make it. 6 months later, Fort Hood, Texas, Maya stood in the courtroom, her left arm still in a brace from the 3rd surgery to repair the shoulder damage, her right knee wrapped and supported by a custom brace that would be permanent. She'd never run again without pain, never pass a PT test without accommodations, never be the same medic she'd been before Vaughn threw her from that helicopter. But she was alive, she was standing, and she was watching justice being served. The military judge, a stern woman with 30 years of service, read the verdicts in a voice that carried to every corner of the packed courtroom. Staff Sergeant Derek Vaughn, on 11 counts of premeditated murder of Iraqi civilians, this court finds you guilty. Vaughn's face showed nothing. No remorse, no emotion. Just the same cold calculation she'd seen at 6,500 feet. The same emptiness that had let him murder 11 people to save his career. On the charge of attempted murder of Sergeant Maya Torres, this court finds you guilty. The judge continued through the charges: war crimes, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, filing false reports, each verdict the same: guilty. Sergeant Derek Vaughn, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, to be served at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. You are stripped of rank, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. Hayes, Chen, and Briggs received identical sentences. Life, dishonorable discharge. The end of everything they'd been. Morrison, who'd let Maya go on that hillside, who'd helped JT figure out what was happening, stood as a witness for the prosecution. He'd been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, his cooperation, his willingness to do the right thing even when it came late. After the proceedings, Colonel Martinez found Maya in the hallway. He'd been at every day of the trial, had personally overseen the investigation, had made sure the case was airtight. Sergeant Torres. He extended his hand. Hell of a thing you did, surviving that fall, getting the evidence, bringing them to justice. Combat medics are hard to kill, sir. Apparently. He smiled, but it faded quickly. I need you to know something. That video you recorded, we used it to investigate other incidents. Turns out Haditha wasn't the first time Vaughn's squad killed civilians. We found 2 more. Villages in Anbar province, a total of 23 additional victims. Maya felt sick. 23 more. Families destroyed, children killed, all because Vaughn had learned he could get away with it, could write reports that made murder look like combat. Those families, she said quietly. Do they know? Do they know someone tried to get justice for them? We've reached out through Iraqi channels. It's complicated. Some of the families are displaced, some are unreachable. But they know. And they know it was an American soldier who exposed it, who refused to stay silent. Martinez paused. You saved more lives than you know, Maya. Not just the 20 Marines, but everyone Vaughn might have killed in the future. 34 people died before I stopped him, Maya said. That's 34 failures. No, that's 34 murders that Vaughn committed. You're not responsible for his crimes. You're responsible for ending them. Martinez pulled an envelope from his jacket. Which brings me to why I'm here. I have 2 things for you. He handed her a small box first. Inside, Sergeant's stripes, the promotion she'd been due 6 months ago before Vaughn had blocked it. You earned these a long time ago, Martinez said. Congratulations, Sergeant Torres. Maya took the stripes, felt their weight, rank earned with blood and broken bones and 6,500 feet of falling. Second, Martinez continued, pulling out official orders, I'm forming a new unit. Combat trauma specialists who teach survival, who train the next generation of medics, who make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. We need instructors, people who've been through hell and learned not just how to survive, but how to make sure others survive too. What kind of unit, sir? The kind that teaches medics to be more than just healers, to be witnesses, to be protectors of the truth. He met her eyes. To be people like you. Stubborn enough to survive anything, brave enough to expose anything, smart enough to turn a 6,500-foot fall into a war criminal's downfall. Maya thought about Vaughn in prison, about 11 civilians in Haditha who'd gotten justice because she'd refused to stay silent, about 23 more victims in other villages who'd finally been acknowledged, about the video that couldn't be erased, the testimony that couldn't be suppressed, the truth that had survived everything Vaughn had done to bury it. Yes, sir, I'm interested. Good. Report to Fort Bragg, Building 7, 1st of next month. We start training immediately. Martinez started to leave, then turned back. One more thing. Morrison asked me to give you this. He handed her a letter. Maya opened it after Martinez left. Sergeant Torres, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I saw what was happening that day on the hill and I made a choice to let you go instead of following orders. But I should have made that choice earlier. Should have questioned why we were hunting you. Should have figured it out before you had to fall 6,500 feet. I wasn't at Haditha. Didn't know about the killings until the investigation. But I was part of the unit that tried to hunt you down afterward, and that makes me complicit even if I didn't pull a trigger. I'm getting out of the Army. Can't serve anymore, knowing I was even peripherally involved in something like this. But before I go, I wanted you to know. What you did was the bravest thing I've ever seen. Not just surviving the fall, but recording the massacre in the first place, keeping the evidence, refusing to stay silent even when silence meant staying alive. You're the kind of soldier the Army needs, the kind who does the right thing even when the right thing costs everything. Thank you for being that person. Thank you for making sure those 11 people in Haditha weren't forgotten. James Morrison. Maya folded the letter carefully, tucked it into her pocket. Morrison had let her go, had helped JT figure it out, had chosen the right side when it mattered, even if he'd taken too long to get there. That was something. Not redemption, but something. Later, that day, JT found her on the courthouse steps looking out at the Texas sunset. So, he said, sitting down beside her, instructor job, huh? Apparently. You earned it. That fall alone. Maya, nobody survives that. Nobody. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had treated Vaughn's wounds, saved his life, trusted him. I survived because I understood something important. What's that? That falling isn't the same as failing. You only fail if you give up before you hit the ground. She smiled slightly. And combat medics don't give up. We're trained to save lives, even our own. Is that what you're going to teach at Fort Bragg? Among other things, she stood, testing her knee. Still painful, probably always would be. But she was standing, she was walking, she was alive. I'm going to teach them that survival isn't about being the toughest or the strongest. It's about being too stubborn to die and smart enough to turn your survival into someone else's reckoning. Think they'll listen? Maya smiled, thinking about Vaughn in prison for life. About 11 civilians whose murders had been exposed instead of covered up. About the video that had survived everything, the fall, the water, the hunt, because she'd been smart enough to hide it in places they couldn't reach. They'd better, because the world is full of people like Vaughn, people who think they can get away with anything, people who think a witness is just another problem to solve by throwing them from a helicopter. She started walking toward the parking lot, her limp barely noticeable now with the custom brace. Someone needs to teach the next generation that witnesses don't disappear just because you throw them from 6,500 feet. They survive, they testify, and they make damn sure justice gets served, even if they have to fall through the sky to make it happen. Behind her, the courthouse stood as a monument to accountability. Inside, Vaughn was being processed for transfer to Leavenworth. Outside, the sun was setting on his freedom, on his career, on everything he'd tried to protect by murdering the woman who'd witnessed his crimes. He'd underestimated her once by throwing her from a helicopter, thinking gravity and water and physics would do what he couldn't do directly. He'd been wrong. Maya Torres had fallen 6,500 feet, had hit water at 120 miles per hour, had survived broken bones and hypothermia and a 5-hour hunt through the Iraqi desert, had survived because combat medics know something important about the human body. It's tougher than people think. It can endure more than seems possible. It can survive falls that should be fatal, if you know the physics, if you understand the angles, if you refuse to give up even when every rational calculation says you should. And she'd done more than survive. She'd made sure Vaughn's crimes were exposed, had turned her survival into his conviction, had proven that some truths are harder to kill than the people who speak them. 3 months from now, she'd stand in front of her first class of combat medics at Fort Bragg. She'd teach them trauma care and field medicine and how to keep people alive in impossible situations. But she'd also teach them something else, something more important, that sometimes the most important thing a medic can do isn't saving a life. It's bearing witness to how a life was lost. It's keeping evidence. It's refusing to stay silent even when silence is safer. It's understanding that the truth is worth falling for, and that surviving the fall means you get to tell that truth to the world. Vaughn had tried to silence her by throwing her into the sky. Instead, he'd given her the platform to make sure his crimes would never be forgotten. That was justice. That was survival. That was what it meant to be a medic who understood that sometimes the greatest act of healing is exposing the wound. Maya Torres' story reminds us that true courage isn't just about surviving the fall. It's about what you do after you hit the ground. It's about refusing to let betrayal silence your testimony. It's about understanding that sometimes the hardest fight isn't against the enemy in front of you, but against the people who wore the same uniform and forgot what it meant. She fell 6,500 feet without a parachute because telling the truth cost her everything. She survived because staying silent would have cost her more. She exposed war crimes because 11 civilians deserved justice, even if justice meant risking her own life to deliver it. We created Hidden Story to honor warriors like Maya, those whose greatest battles aren't always the ones that make headlines, whose courage is often punished before it's recognized, and who prove that character isn't defined by how hard you fall. It's defined by whether you get back up and make them regret pushing you. If Maya's impossible survival and unbreakable will to seek justice moved you, if her refusal to let betrayal win reminded you that some truths are worth falling for, we invite you to join our mission. Subscribe to Hidden Story to discover more warriors whose quiet courage changed everything in ways we're only beginning to understand. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. We love hearing from our global community. Have you ever had to choose between staying silent and speaking truth, even when truth had a cost? Share your story below. Your courage might inspire someone else facing an impossible choice.